Thank you for being here, and we want to give you the warmest welcome on behalf of the co-conveners. So we are a very nice group, close group of friends that are organizing and putting this meeting together for all of you, all of us. And that is the International Science Council, the UN Department for Economic and Social Affairs, UNGA, the UN Development Program, UNDP, the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, SDSN, and the Stockholm Environment Institute. We give you the warmest welcome to this first ever Science Day as a special event of HLPF. Who's coming? Thank you. My name is Yvonne, and I'm Yvonne Lobos. I'm senior expert with the Stockholm Environment Institute out of our Latin America office in Colombia. Very nice to meet you all. And my partner.
My name is Laurel Patterson. I'm the head of SDG integration at UNDP. Welcome everyone.
And we wanted to tell you just 2 words about what we're doing today. So as you can see, this is a Saturday meeting, very informal. It's a space for exchange. But we basically wanted to have a conversation with you because we are very concerned. We know that we all are excited about the Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Agenda, but we also know that it's not going very well. And we're starting to get very concerned that as we start feeling the urgency to move forward and start going faster, that we might start making decisions that are maybe based on different reasons that have to do with political interest, with convenience, with which SDGs can we get to the race, to the end of the race faster. And that's understandable. But there's also a lot of evidence, a lot of research, we put a lot of work into creating methodologies, tools, knowledge, and facts that can help us make better decisions. So how do we make sure that we use those more in the second half of the SDGs? That's what we're here to discuss today.
In doing that, what we want to ensure is not only that we're bringing the best science, the best evidence, the best insights, and we'll discuss that in plenary, as well as at the tables where you are. We want to ensure that we're activating different kinds of intelligences around this room. Why? Because we have had these conversations many times, as Yvonne is saying. We sit here, we agree with each other, we know that it's for this is probably a like-minded group, and we carry on. So what would make this different was a really important question that we asked ourselves in organizing. So a couple of things that we're trying to weave through, and the reason why we're doing it is not for not for a performance effect in any sense, but in a sense of activation and building our collective. This is a collective, and collectives are what move issues forward. So 2 ways that you're going to see that. We have our colleague Kelby Berg with us, who is an internationally renowned scribe, a generative scribe, that's going to help us capture the conversations visually. It's a different way for you to interact with the content that you're all very familiar with and you're going to be talking about around the tables. So again, we're trying to share back with you a reflection and a resonance that hopefully, perhaps, helps you see something different. And for the colleagues that are joining via the live stream, similarly, what is different? What am I seeing? What's opening up? What's changing? What might it be? What could it be? So we'll have that opportunity in the visual scribe. We'll be documenting the session today, so you will see some people moving around with video cameras and equipment and so on. I hope that's not intrusive in any way, but it really is part of capturing this. We want to do more of these, make them better every time. Stay tuned for the close. What's very important for us is that we're leaving this room not only with a collective sense of where we may need to put emphasis, but an individual commitment. It's very, very important. And sometimes when issues are so big, it becomes really difficult to think of the small steps today, that we can make that would start to put us on a different trajectory. If you think about it all the way through many years, it can just feel overwhelming. We want to avoid that. So we're going to be joined by a live musical performance, one of the first times that we've done it in a setting like this at the close. And the opportunity is not only for you to listen in and feel inspired, we hope you do, but to take that as part of your own reflections, your own commitments, your own actions coming out of here. So stay tuned for the end. We're really excited for that, but don't see it as something different from this meeting and this process. It's a contribution into it so that we get more out of it.
And we should then just say that after this opening part of the event, we're going to have a very interesting panel discussion here. That's why you see the chairs. and then we're going to pass it on to you at the table so we can have some engaging discussions. Make sure that you use them to interact, to use the terrace, to enjoy the space. But let's get to it. One thing that we really want to do is leave today with some really concrete points of what we want to know more about, what we want to do different, and especially what we want to say to the HLPF that is happening downstairs at the moment, but also what's coming in September with the SDG Summit and even next year with Summit of the Future. So let's get started, shall we? And I have none other than His Excellency KtomRÖSI, the President of the General Assembly, to give us some opening words. And definitely one thing that we need to know, Your Excellency, is what else would you be doing on a Saturday morning? I'm very curious. Please, the floor is yours.
Running track in the Central Park, but I have to trade it now, and I did it gladly. But with your permission, I have to warn you, the informal closing will also involve some informal remarks. I'm here to rock the boat. So, dear friends, dear colleagues, Excellencies, I'm so happy to see this event coming along, and many, many thanks to all of you for making it to New York. As we have heard, we are at halfway point of the time frame designed for the implementation of the SDGs, and we are badly off track. We are still in game, that's good news. But the game needs to change urgently. It's not only the speed, not only the ambition, but the whole game. Human activities exceeded 6 of the 9 planetary boundaries. Inequalities are on the rise. Social and financial stabilities in many countries are weakened, seriously undermined, and we are facing the most complex set of crises in Europe since the World War II. What is hindering the timely implementation of SDGs? As you scientists used to think in terms of systems, let's start from where we are now. We inherited accumulated risk factors, and they are accelerating. We inherited transformative goals. That is good news. But we inherited also mostly old-fashioned policies, mostly old-fashioned market regulations, mostly old-fashioned financial incentives, mostly old-fashioned institutions, national and international alike, and, on the other hand, rapidly changing technologies and science. So we expect transformation from this combination of components. It is not surprising that transformation is happening much slower than what we wish to see. So what is needed to significantly accelerate the sustainability transformation? Let me offer you 7 points, 7 suggestions. 1, create national transformation strategies based on SDGs. Not all our countries have done so. 2, align regulations with announced goals. We know they are in many cases contradicting to each other. 3, learn how to calculate all important externalities of actions or inactions. In short term, go beyond GDP. 4, learn how to better evaluate the impacts of our investments by reducing negative externalities across all 3 pillars of sustainability. In other words, go beyond GDP translated into the language of finances. 5. Identify and prioritize on game-changing elements in the SDG implementation. It's not enough to make the same a bit faster. We need to change the game, and we need to focus on a real game-changer element. 6. Build transparent roadmap of implementation. We have 7.5 years ahead. That's what we need. 7. Improve science-based validation mechanism of implementation. Because for the time being, the picture that we are getting from member states is based on reports. And reports are based on various aspects, not standardized and not necessarily science-based validation. For this, we need robust scientific support that does not exist in the UN for the time being. We must also modernize our pipeline from science to policy and back. So engaging science must be a two-way traffic in the UN and in the member states. Policymakers must make it clear where they see the greatest challenges, and scientists must provide evidence-based options for solving these challenges and clear indications of the expectable impacts of action or lack of action. This approach should help us to address root causes rather than symptoms, to remove barriers that have impeded our progress, and to be proactive rather than reactive. The political decisions are and will have to be taken by politicians. Scientists cannot step into their shoes, cannot take their responsibilities. It would not work anyway. But they, scientists, can and must be part of the decision shaping with their best knowledge, data, and analysis. It applies to the implementation of all SDGs. It applies to the whole sustainability transformation that we badly need. At the UN and in the GA in particular, General Assembly, we have to broaden the general knowledge about the challenges we are attempting to tackle. Because to quote Carl Sagan, we are in very bad trouble if we don't understand the planet we are trying to save. Science, at its core, is based on reliable data. Data we desperately need to make the necessary changes. Changes to how we manage our resources, how we monitor our progress, and how we validate the implementation of the SDGs. Stephen Hawking once said, we cannot really argue with a mathematical theory. Translated to our UN speak, it means that, especially in our times of mutual mistrust, it is much easier to establish a shared knowledge base for our deliberations from irrefutable scientific facts than from diverging political opinions. In a logical world, evidence beats ideology. But we know it is not an ideal world. Still, I'm proud to say that throughout this session, we have made strides in bridging the gap between research and policy. My team has worked to ensure that politicians from around the globe recognize the relevance and benefit of science in decision shaping. We have conducted science briefings, and many thanks to you who participated, recognizing the need for a shared knowledge repository, and supported member states taking initiatives to drive our efforts forward. The recent establishment of the Group of Friends of Science for Action, co-chaired by Belgium, India, and South Africa, many thanks for them, has given us momentum to enhance the role of science in decision shaping in the UN, particularly in the General Assembly. Moreover, led by Serbia, a group of countries has initiated a process to launch the Decade of Science for Sustainability, allowing us to clearly define the scientific mechanisms required for our deliberations. This is progress. The effective, innovative, and transformative knowledge we need is out there. It exists. We just need to listen to, harness it, and use it when we shape decisions. So we have the necessary tools. We still lack the shared, open, and free system to use our toolkit. But there are excellent platforms, organizations, and people working on that. Many of them in this room here today. Thank you for being here. I hope today's meeting will help us pool our resources towards the common aim to make science an unavoidable component of shaping decisions on sustainability transformation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We'll move to our next speaker. I'm delighted to introduce Her Excellency, the Ambassador of South Africa to the United Nations. Ambassador Joey, the floor is yours.
Good morning, distinguished friends, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Let me start by thanking the organizers for this invitation. And I'm also honored to be sharing the platform of this opening session with two distinguished individuals. One whom I have the pleasure of experiencing as the President of the General Assembly. You've just heard him now. He has really brought deep thinking to this world. He brought and elevated science, and he pushed the boundary to the delight of others and to the discomfort of others. And this PGA has consistently talked about and pushed for transformation, so I'm honored to share this space with you. But I also had the pleasure of listening to Sir Peter Blackman on Tuesday. And I experienced such clarity of thinking on the issues that we're dealing with. His contributions around, and with some of these things I'm learning, and I'm learning for the first time, pluralist approaches, systems thinking, which I've also been doing, systems thinking, and the value of science used correctly. And the one thing that he said, and I have to ask him to remind me when he says, use science wisely, or everyone will die. So thank you for that. So as you all know that I'm not a scientist, but represent a country here at the UN that believes so much in the power of science. And I'm talking to you today as a person who has worked a few months with you this year as we're preparing and hosting the STR Forum. Ambassador Woodruff of the UK and I had the pleasure of working with all of you in this journey, and I learned a lot from it. So I'm going to share with you my reflections on that process. So one can easily say that we need science for the implementation of all the SDGs. But what I have learned is that science is actually the bedrock and foundation for implementation of SDGs. We cannot do any or implement any of those SDGs without science. And we need both natural science, social sciences to help us problem solve, to give us reliable data, to help us develop options and choose wisely with a full understanding of the implications, the repercussions of the choices and the actions that we then have. And this is applicable to each and every single SDG. Secondly, that this science is so relevant for all the crises that we're talking about. So we all now understand the multiple crises that we're facing, whether it's financial crisis, climate change, health and pandemics, or stagnant economic growth and recovery, slow recovery, or inflation. All these multiple crises, they must be looked at with the science lens so that we increase the chances of us dealing with them effectively, and in some instances dealing with them efficiently. And here, data again becomes crucial. Thirdly, that science must root itself in the societal realities and challenges we are facing. It cannot remain in the ivory towers of the science institutes or in the academic halls where research is being carried out, but it must come down to the level of the people. It is about creating knowledge that we can apply to real world to solve our problems. And here I had many of you in different sessions talking about the importance of transdisciplinary approaches, talking about inclusiveness, talking about citizen science. And in here I have to refer to the role of women in science and making sure that women are fully represented in innovation ecosystems. So there's no future without science, and I have the honor of facilitating or of chairing CSABA, and those are the conclusions are very essential for inclusivity. Fourthly, what also came through many times in this journey that I had with you is that there are different ways of knowing, and that there is knowledge that has been created, applied, and is valued and effective. I am here talking about indigenous knowledge. Science must respect the different ways of knowing, and I'm sure there is a way of validating indigenous knowledge so that we can utilize it, rely more on it, leverage that indigenous knowledge. The fifth and last point is that I have always known that research is key, both applied research and basic research, and no country can develop without investment in research. What I've seen in the STI forum, and even in this room, I'm sure, is the willingness to collaborate in research and development. And that collaboration is appreciated. But we must find innovative ways of creating meaningful partnerships as we collaborate. On Tuesday, I heard about boundary spanning approaches and initiatives, and that's the way to go. So this collaboration must serve our developmental purposes and greatly reduce the north-south divide. Before I just want to quickly talk to why it's so important for me and for South Africa. And I just want to turn quickly to my country. Why South Africa was inspired and continue to be inspired by the science agenda at the UN. All of you will know that we are a country that has had a particular experience. We therefore have always valued education and other means of empowering our nation to grow and prosper. Science in South Africa is seen in that light, and accordingly we value science. We believe science should and can meaningfully continue to give us a just world, an equitable world, benefiting the most vulnerable. We have therefore institutionalized science through the various national systems that exist in South Africa. There are science councils, and I am so delighted to have met my compatriot, Dr. Van Gassel, because he used to be one of those, which is the National Research Foundation, and that will make sure we allocate funding for research through the National Research Foundation. So we have different institutes from scientific and industrial research councils, health and medical, geoscience, socio-economic science councils, biodiversity, agricultural, astronomical, nuclear, all of those. The contribution of science to SDGs is very clear to us. And again, I was very happy to hear from Laura in terms of the work that is now helping to say what will be the difference that makes a difference with regard to these SDGs. We also believe in identifying and developing the African research agenda. And here we are guided by Agenda 2063, and we continue to work with the AU to do precisely that. The recently created STI Coalition for Africa, and it was created during the 8th multi-stakeholder, during this recent STI forum, will further assist us to advance the Africa science agenda within the UN. We believe in science cooperation within the continent, sharing the resources that we have within those science councils that I was referring to, and there are various initiatives within our Ministry of Science and Education to that effect. But we also deal with global partnerships, and in this room is an opportunity for these global partnerships that allows us to scale up the work that we do. The manner that we handled COVID, the scientific guidance we followed, and the resources that we invested in science helped us get through the challenges that we're facing, and we continue to believe that's the way to go. Let me end by mentioning some few thoughts for you as we move forward. It is essential that we own the space at the UN to pursue the value of science in helping us deal with global challenges. And PGR can agree more with what you have proposed. The STI Forum and its various mechanisms are essential for that, and they really require our support. And I personally think that more can be done with the STI Forum. I think it is currently undertaken. So, Belgium, India, and South Africa, as you heard from the PGR, has started this group of friends to really bring science to problem solving everywhere. Secondly, let's deepen those partnerships between the developed and developing countries in the area of science and research. You are doing that particularly. In this partnership, it is essential that we treat each other as equals, as all parties contribute meaningfully to the partnership. And when we do that, make sure that the benefits are equally shared as well. As you embark on various scientific projects and initiatives, ask yourselves, is this inclusive? Does it leave anyone behind, in particular women and youth? Is this empowering? Does it build capacity, especially capacity of partners in the South? Does this contribute meaningfully to the North-South cooperation? And does it contribute to open science, to socio-economic welfare of humanity? It is in our interest that we work hard to reduce the science and digital divide. And let me end by reiterating this fact. Science is the bedrock and foundation for the 2030 development agenda. Meaningful global collaboration is therefore essential for that. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. Very, very inspired from your voice already. But we have one more voice to hear for the opening. Sir Peter Lukman. Can I call you Peter? Peter, please give us the science perspective to officially conclude the opening of the event, please.
Thank you. As I think all of you will know, the International Science Council is the world's primary NGO representing both the natural and social sciences. And it's trying to bring a pluralistic, scientifically sound, and geographically diverse perspectives to the table. Much inspired by President KtomRÖSI, we've been refocusing our efforts to be an essential interface between the scientific community and the multilateral system. We're establishing an office in New York, and in partnership with UNESCO, we'll be supporting the newly formed group of friends for Science for Action, which was an initiative the International Science Council brought to the table for a number of member states last year, and one that President KtomRÖSI has done much to foster. I'm really delighted to see Ambassador Joini here from South Africa, along with Belgium and India, have put the effort into getting this group of trends off the ground. But as President KtomRÖSI has already said, we need to be honest. Progress is not a word you actually accompany with the SDGs these days. Progress has actually been extraordinarily disappointing. COVID and conflict may create excuses, but there are far deeper reasons. And the Global Sustainability Development Reports of 2019 and the 2023 one, which is about to emerge, are frank in their assessments. The SDGs in their origin were a somewhat political construct. Their siloed nature with 70 SDGs and 169 non-adaptable targets does not align well with how governments operate in a rapidly changing world. Science was really an afterthought in their design. Can we not change that now as we enter the second half of the SDG window? Thinking in 17 silos has led to linear thinking, which undermines the potential of science to have optimal impact. The Global Sustainable Development Reports and many others, such as the World in 2050 report, has emphasised the need to shift to a systems-based nexus approach to the sustainability agenda. There are extensive analyses that show the need for more pluralistic approaches. The social sciences are poorly employed, while there's been an understandable willingness of governments to invest in technology and technological solutions, and we need these, just as a big science approach has been applied in fundamental sciences. We need a big science approach using transdisciplinary methods and social sciences along with the natural sciences to make real progress. More broadly, science, until recently, has been too often marginalised in the multilateral system. It's been seen in a tactical, technical, rather than a strategic role. This is self-defeating. And this issue extends to member states. Most do not have effective science advisory mechanisms. Even the lessons of COVID are not being heeded. All member states need their own ecosystems, irrespective of their level of development, of knowledge generators, of evidence synthesizers such as academies, and experienced knowledge brokers who can work bi-directly at interfaces, President KtomRÖSI said, between the policy community and the science community. Access to power by the science community must be real and bi-directional and not tokenistic. Science is a global activity, but most science is funded at the national level. Less than 2% of the global research budget goes to transnational activity, and generally in very limited areas and dominated by the global north. On Monday at 8 o'clock in the morning, in Conference Room 11, the International Science Council will release the report of a commission chaired by Helen Clark, former Administrator of the UNGA, and Irina Bukova, former Director General of UNESCO, building on several years' consultation, arguing that the lack of suitable funding instruments acting at scale, but acting locally, are needed to develop and apply actionable knowledge. That commission sees as a fundamental gap, and this as a fundamental gap in the needed toolkit to advance the sustainability agenda. This new commitment must not be at the expense of basic and discovery science, which can provide solutions for the future, but we need a big science approach now to produce and provide actionable knowledge across the world. Here, stakeholders, as Ambassador Joini has just said, must be equal partners with the science community in all respects. And new funding mechanisms will be needed to do so. Finally, I remember my first discussion with President KtomRÖSI. He suggested we needed to focus far more on trust in science. Because science is one, if not the only true universal language we have there. And if we don't think about the need to rebuild trust in science, then we have nothing. What we're seeing is a declining trust in science and its replacement with a too often manipulated and often politicized pseudo-knowledge. Only generalizations are possible about what is the cause of this. Some of the distrust results from our own behaviours, with our often exhibited hubris, the internal incentives that drive much of what we do, and our unwillingness to engage properly and respectfully with other knowledge systems, as again the ambassador has pointed out. But much is due to social change, disinformation, politicisation, and effective polarisation. The science and policy communities need to work urgently together on this particular challenge. It's a giant existential risk in my mind, and the ISC is reaching out to a number of UN agencies to partner with them to truly understand how we can address this declining trust in science. Ambassador Jeremy attributed to me a quote, which was actually not from me, but from a playwright writing about Galileo, when in the last line of that play it says, "Use science wisely, or everyone will die." A little bit histrionic perhaps, but perhaps we could turn it around and say, the world must use science more wisely and create systems to do so, or else the ambitions of 2015 will be rapidly replaced with despair. Working with science, as both the ambassador and the president have suggested, can and must shift us to a more optimistic future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Peter. So colleagues, I think this was a great way to start, and we want to continue in the same spirit. Very frank, very open, and this is a point for action, this is a moment for frank exchange. And I think it's a great provocation for all of us to think through what Peter has mentioned at the last point. If science was not at the center of the agenda when it was created, what would it take to put it there in the second half? That's a really important issue for us to discuss today. And I think we've heard about some of the ways that we could get there, deepening national investments. And the ambassador from South Africa gave us several examples of how that's done in South Africa, making that connection to global, asking ourselves questions, is it fair? Is it inclusive? Not only is the partnership inclusive, are the benefits from it equally received and utilized? And I think we heard a lot even from our first speaker, from the President of the General Assembly, around not only making sure we have a strong connection from science to policy making, but from science to policy back to science. And I heard that echoed Peter again at the end with this notion of how we connect knowledge generators, synthesizers, and those network and bridge builders. Do we understand what those different roles are? And are we optimizing it across our different sectors of which we may be experts and different levels of engagement from local through to global? This last point on trust, I think, is so critical. We see it come through in trust in science. We see it come through in just about every major metric of trust across the world. There's declining trust in government. There's declining trust even in communities. Where we find that trust exists still is people, in most of the more recent surveys, say, I continue to have trust in my neighbors. I continue to have trust in those closest to me. What does that mean? What is that telling us about the way the world is being polarized and fractured? Are there some clues in there? Is there some science and data that could help us understand how to create these bridges and stitch back together a social fabric which has been so stretched? So I'm going to leave that as a set of open provocations for us and really sincerely thank our three speakers for starting us off with such a tremendous provocation and set of insights. Thank you. And I'm going to call on our panelists to come up for the next part of our section. So if you are one of those panelists, I didn't bring my notes up. It's supposed to be informal, right? So if you don't mind when I... And you're on the screen. So you can find yourselves. And so what we'll do, we have some time, we don't have enough time, but we are going to take some questions from you. So we want to build the interaction between you and our esteemed panelists. We're going to move to a short coffee break, hopefully that lets you ask any questions that you want and connect with each other. And then when we come back from the coffee break, it's for discussion at your table. And that's really, really important because each and every single one of you is bringing something unique to this room, and we need you to take something unique out of it. So that's just so that you know where we're heading with the design, and also so that you can start thinking if there's any questions that you have. I'm going to ask you to come and hand your mic to do that in a couple of minutes. So I'm going to introduce our panelists. I have to kind of turn sideways. Some of you can't see me behind that, it's fine. We'll continue this way. We have Maria Francesca, who is the Assistant Secretary General at UNGA. We have Albert, who's the Director General at the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis, and has held other roles which seem to have a number of connections across the room. Our dear colleague, Dr. Vivi, who's the Deputy Minister for Maritime Affairs and Natural Resources and the head of the National SDG Secretariat in Indonesia. And Dr. Asa Persson, who's the Deputy Director of the Stockholm Environment Institute, one of the co-hosts of this event today, and also one of the members of the independent group of scientists for the GSDR. Maria Francesca, I'm going to start with you. I'll give you an opportunity for some first reflections. We'll hear from every speaker for a couple of minutes, and then we'll mix it up. And so save all your hard questions, colleagues, for then. So Maria, to you, if you could highlight what you think or what you're seeing in terms of the current evidence of SDG progress, SDG challenges, and what does that tell you about the most credible pathways and evidence for us to take progress forward in the second half? Over to you and welcome.
Thank you very much. Let me use the mic. Hello everybody, and thank you for having me. I would like to really appreciate this opportunity to share with you what the Department of Economic and Social Affairs does in this area to support the membership and bring as much as possible evidence-based recommendations, options, policy solutions to the membership. My perspective, therefore, is the SDG Secretariat, in a way, perspective. And I think we have, obviously, as you know, worked a lot to get to where we are, but there were many setbacks, and as it was already mentioned, midway towards the deadline of 2030, we are certainly not in a good spot. We are actually very, very obviously not on track for most goals. There are goals where progress has been made, about 15% of them, but nevertheless, even in that area, in those areas, the progress is insufficient. And in many other areas, indicators tell us that we have setbacks and reverse of progress, which was maybe there before the pandemic and before we went through a number of other shocks, of course, including wars, old and new, and climate change crisis. So what do? We really, as the PGA already said, the President of General Assembly already said, we really have to accelerate our actions, and not only accelerate but change, transform the way we think about how to get there. And I think in this respect, what we see as very, very essential is leveraging interlinkages among the goals and with the Paris Agreement and climate change environment. And these interlinkages are what I'm sure we will talk about them a little bit more, but are the way to think about progress, we believe. And we also, of course, need to strengthen the science policy society interface, because this
Yeah,
way we
third
can
number no,
really,
no, fourth number mic चलने आज अब first best तेरी पास है
offer facts,
third number
evidence-based
fourth number
proposals, solutions, and hopefully less controversial because based on facts and non-disputable. You cannot challenge that water is wet. I mean, that's a fact. And we hope to have as obvious things as that to bring you to the attention of decision makers so that we can progress on that common base.
Thank you so much. Some of you were probably formulating the argument. Is water wet? Could we dispute that? What would it take? Thank you so much for bringing that to the table. Albert, I'll turn to you next. So, the Institute for Applied Systems Analysis. We've heard about interlinkages from Maria Francesca. We've certainly heard about the importance of taking the systems agenda forward. And that is hard with all the little boxes of 17 times 169, so on and so forth. And it does indeed fracture exactly where we would want to connect. What's your perspective on that, and what do you think is important then in the second half of the agenda?
Thank you for that. I want to just reiterate, I think clearly what we're doing at the moment is not working. I think everybody has got a sense of that around the table. And I think from our perspective, one of the chief reasons is we're failing is that we're not finding traction at the local level in terms of what we're trying to achieve at a global level in terms of SDGs. And from our perspective, this is a great pity. The SDGs from an IASA perspective collectively form a systems problem at the end of the day. And we must represent some of the most pressing priorities for humanity and the planet, of course, are contained in them. And these have to be resolved in a cooperative a way. We must also understand that no nation state is going to solve the SDGs unilaterally. It requires cooperation, systems approach, broad multilateral cooperation around common interests, and a deep societal commitment. The SDGs need to be addressed collectively. So we talk about food security, water security, energy security, biodiversity issues. These have to be analyzed simultaneously. And we also understand that the priorities in terms of the SDGs and the sequence of implementation and response is locally contextualized. The priorities are not the same in Asia as they are in Africa or the same in Europe. And what these priorities are need to be identified in a co-design process with regional stakeholders, as has been raised already. Capacities to facilitate systems analysis. At the moment, it's a complex science. The idea of nexus exploration, as I indicated earlier, and pathway discoveries for solutions that brings together the best of science and the co-design process simply does not exist outside a number of research institutions around the globe. And that means that the SDG implementation is not happening effectively. We're not taking the systemic understanding and translating it into actionable knowledge at the local level. So from our side, the international funding community has previously invested in global networks such as CGIAR for decades to look at issues of food security. We at the International Science Council believe that the SDG landscape requires similar scale of interventions moving forward if we really want to make an impact. And I will get back to that in the subsequent questions.
Thank you, Albert. Dr. Vivi, you are leading the National SDG Secretariat. We may have to share, thank you. In a country that's experiencing multiple sets of opportunities, multiple challenges and risks, you have a national SDG roadmap, which is quite impressive. You're in a process of refreshing it, costing it, making that real. And I wonder, as you look to the second half of the agenda, where are those areas and opportunities where you think is important to focus, both from the perspective of Indonesia and its unique circumstances, but also more globally as you're reflecting the group today? Thank you, Dr. Vivi.
Thank you very much for the questions and also the opportunity for having us in this very important event. At this midway point of the 2030, we recognize that there is still a lot of things to be done to accelerate the progress. So that's why, considering the scarce of the resource as well as along the line with the effort from the recovery from the COVID pandemic, we explore the SDG gap and use system methods to identify the policy interventions that move the needle of the persistent challenges by undertaking the investigating process called the SDG push. This is work together with the UNDP as well as work with the local SDG centers for revising the Indonesia's SDGs map. So basically what we've done is identifying the SDGs targets and indicators of which its successful achievement is most likely to be associated with the successful of the achievement of other target and indicators or highest interlinkages. It is a data-driven base on the Indonesian empirical most recent data, use network theory and economic complexity, and went through the transparent and inclusive process, meaning inclusive process with other stakeholders. And the study determines the performance of each indicators in each province, which is then used to calculate the proximity, the density, and also the centrality of each SDG indicators. The ranking of indicators based on the centrality of values then can be used to determine the priority indicators at the national levels. So from the 289 indicators, we succeed to use 191 indicators and found that 36 indicators with the highest centrality values, which include health, and then laws. The health is including the national health system, health security, and then birth certificate and security, water and sanitation. Education, mainly the basic and elementary education, and then school infrastructure and the ICT. Inequality, mainly from related to the SDG number 11, and then energy transitions, housing and environment. And this result linked to the findings of the SDG push, which using the CGE and micro simulations model, identified that the SDGs 11 is lagging in the areas of free primary secondary education, universal health coverage, providing safe drinking water, and increasing renewable energy. So the SDG push strategy also provide us with insight with some estimations in the growth in order to achieve the SDGs as well as achieving Indonesian goal by 2045. So now we are in the process of developing the long-term development plan 2025-2045, and in part of the strategy from those interlinkage studies, we build the nexus of fuel, food, energy, and water, and also some other game changer strategy, including the green economy, the blue economy, circular economy, and of course, building human competitiveness. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vivian. I think what's so interesting about the Indonesian example is this effort to bring together different scientific disciplines. So the best that we can learn from the evidence, the progress, the challenges to date, as local as that can be made possible and available, connecting it with futures and foresight. What does that tell us about tomorrow? Well, how would that impact the choices that we make today? Connecting it with conversations with policymakers and using qualitative data, which was quite interesting, as inputs into economic models. So we really start to look at leverage points a little bit differently and costing that, making it real. So thank you for that example and experience. It's a pleasure to partner with you on it. Dr. Kirsten, let me come to you next. GSDR will be out shortly. You've been part of the scientific panel for 2019 and 2023. 2019 is a report that I'm sure many of us refer back to often. What's different? What's coming through in 2023? What's important for you in what you see? And what does that tell us about implementation in the second half? That wasn't the question I was supposed to ask you, but I was captured by the moment. You're here. Okay.
Yeah, I'll do my best. I'm the president also on behalf of the Stockholm Environment Institute.
and the independent group of scientists prepared the GSDR. Thank you all for showing up. We really look forward to this opportunity to discuss the findings of the report with you. I'm pleased to have two other members of the group here, Professor Jaime Miranda and Professor Noritika Kanya, and our secretariat. What did we learn from the GSDR? Well, I don't think I need to repeat again that we are far off track. We know this. It comes as no surprise. I think we all had to look at the data more than once to really, when it was first presented to us, that actually it hasn't really changed in the 2019 report. But let's also focus on the positives. I think that's really important given where we are now, halfway point. And also interestingly, a fun fact from evolutionary psychology, our brains are much better trained to discover problems and risks rather than what is actually working, what's going well. Not so that we can be complacent, of course, but what can we learn about them and build on. And in the GSDR, we do find that there is a lot of legitimacy and support for the SDGs. There's high public awareness about the SDGs. We have seen a discursive effect of the SDGs. Many groups in society are using the SDG language. Science has showed up, I would say, for the SDGs. One of the few positive curves we have in the report is when we look at scientific publications addressing SDGs. There's been something like a 15-fold increase. So these are some positives, but of course we can't stop short at the rhetorical level of impact, but we want to understand the practical impact. And I wanted to share with you a couple of examples, just showing some of these positive impacts. For example, our researchers at the Stockholm Environment Institute, they work with energy planning models, building capacity in national governments in low and middle income countries, particularly to develop their NDCs, their national climate plans. And in that context, the SDG framework has been really valuable and important in order to systematically look at the co-benefits of taking action. So actually, for example, in Nigeria, where they could estimate the health benefits from taking more climate action, they could save up to 30,000 lives by 2030. That enabled them to set a higher level of emission in the NDC. So SDGs are really useful as this systematic framework for measuring co-benefits, providing that compelling, quantified, prospective evidence to policymakers. Another example, the sort of long-term compass that SDG framework provides. So from Europe, the region where I'm active, I think the Green Deal, which the European Commission would say is the sort of regional manifestation of the SDG framework, the regional interpretation of the SDGs. The Green Deal did provide a compass now going through the energy crisis from the Ukraine war, and also the recovery packages from the pandemic were geared towards reaching those long-term climate targets. So I think in that respect, in times of crisis, these types of long-term frameworks can play a role. It's challenging, but I think they were quite successful. Finally, the local level, and I think this is really interesting and exciting also as a scientist. From our work with local governments, we see that there is this sense of policy entrepreneurship, and they can use the sort of very global SDG framework to speak to their local priorities. We have seen examples of local governments structuring their budget according to the SDGs, and we also had really interesting processes looking at interlinkages between SDGs at the local level. A lot less of the silo-based thinking in local government, it seems, than at national level. So just wanted to share those positive examples as well to remind us that things are possible, even though we are very far off track.
Asa, thank you. I'll take a couple of questions from the colleagues in the room. If you want to put your hand up, some version of us will find you. Yes. We'll take maybe 3 or 4 questions, and then I'll give all of the panelists an opportunity to come back in answering the questions and any other reflections. I saw hands lost, and I'm finding.
Okay, hello, my name is JB from Youth for Privacy, and I have a question regarding the adequate metrics to gauge success of the SDG progress. One of the concerns I had as we get closer to 2030 is that as maybe some of the metrics of the SDGs are met, a lot of the political pressure will be to maybe move the flagpost so that they'll say that instead of achieving X amount, we achieved half amount, but still consider that a success. So when it comes to objective data, what can scientists and other technical groups do to ensure that those kind of political those goals are not moved, so that those SDG progress has some sense of accountability to them?
Thank you so much. Good morning, distinguished panelists. My name is Ana Rosa Soares. I'm SDG Synthesis Coalition Secretary, heading this initiative working on synthesis of SDGs, but I'm a chief of evaluation of evidence and lessons in UNDP. And I heard very interesting comments around how we are off track, very much focused on the progress. Also very interesting comment around that we not only need to accelerate, but we need to transform and change the way we go about accelerating the SDGs. Dr. Albert specifically mentioned that what we're doing is not working. And my question is it that it's not working, or is it that we're not quite doing what we committed to do it? For example, leaving no one behind, or reaching the furthest behind first. Do we have data? We have specific data sets, evidence to say what is working and what's not working in an approachable way, in an easy way, accessible way to promote acceleration and with a different mindset. And what would you suggest would be the best way to organize that kind of data of what works and what doesn't work so we can indeed accelerate and then make some progress? Thank you so much.
Hi, good morning everyone. My name is Karuna Rana and I'm from Mauritius. It's a small island developing state in Africa, or rather we like to call ourselves a large ocean state. So my question has to do with a particular aspect of the different SDGs, given ocean is key to me. So the blue economy is seen to be the next economic frontier for a lot of small island developing states. Because it would help with poverty alleviation, energy, climate change, etc. But at the same time, I have seen it to be in conflict with some of the other SDGs, because blue economy is being also, deep sea oil exploration is inclusive in blue economy in a lot of different countries, including my own. I've heard quotes saying that net zero does not mean that we stop drilling for oil, and this is very concerning to me. I would love to hear examples or maybe your thoughts on how could we avoid a situation like that, or what can I do back home in my country or maybe other countries to convince the government based on science and data, because there is a lot of science and data that proves that deep sea oil exploration is going to harm the ocean, but also take us back on some of the SDGs. So if you have any thoughts and ideas or examples or success stories, I'd love to hear that. Thank you.
Thank you. But can I ask Ambassador KtomRÖSI instead? Is that okay? Ambassador, I remember 10 years ago you were chairing the Open Working Group when we were formulating SDGs. And I remember vividly we had the conversation on the role of science. And now here we are, 10 years later, and we are still discussing the same. My question is, to what extent actually the work of scientists can really influence the intergovernmental process within the UN? Because I think this is quite serious now, how much we are off track to SDGs. And we have a very good chance, actually, working together as scientists to help the process in the UN. But I know that evidence-based policy is not as easy as it looks. So if you can share with us your perspective and insights, if the process of this can help the intergovernmental process. Thank you.
Hello everyone. My name is CSABA. I am from Rutgers University. I'm a researcher there. So I have a question / comment that I would like to open a bit of conversation among the speakers. So we heard even in the opening remarks from the General Assembly President that we are in a moment in which we need transformative change to occur, but we are moving a lot towards the so-called incremental change versus a more continuous one that makes sure that we're not just making fast steps, but we are actually changing the whole environment so that we can achieve a change that is inclusive. And on this last point that was also mentioned by the ambassador earlier, inclusivity requires a lot of efforts there. And without a real co-production with communities, so scientists, researchers, together with local communities and people, there cannot be a real inclusion, and we cannot achieve equity. So the benefits can also, not just stay within the UN, but also to the communities we're trying to help. And I have just one last question, which is quite provocative, is how the UN are trying to bring science inside? Because when I was teaching, one student of mine once asked me, what's the point for me of getting a PhD? This student was asking me questions about how can I work with the UN? And so he asked me, why do I have to get a PhD if they don't even count the PhD as a work experience? And that was probably my only and first time in my life I had no answer for these students. So I want to, ask you, so maybe I can go back to him and answer his questions. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. My name is Marianne Weissheim. I work for the German Institute for International and Security Affairs. And I would like to follow up on what the colleague said, because my question is really, how do we incentivize the research uptake, both at the UN, but in particular also at the country level? Because I think we haven't mentioned enough one elephant in the room, and that is the politics around the SDGs. And how do we work with this politics? How do we foster political will around going forward? And I think we need, as scientists, to build this into our strategy of communicating science. Because as you said, we need this kind of bridge builders and the knowledge on how politics thinks and works, and what are their incentives to do things, and how can we work with that? I think that would be very relevant in that context. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So these are excellent questions for all four of you in different ways. I can imagine picking these up, so don't feel that you need to take every single one in order, but you've heard questions around the data and ensuring that we're holding decision makers, or we're holding those who made the commitments in the first place, we are shifting them as the challenges move. We have a provocation around what really works or what doesn't work. Is it a question that it's not working? Is it a question that we haven't found the right way of advancing? Or are there some examples there from the SDG from the large ocean state? Thank you for that. That's I'm going to keep that. So from the large ocean state, questions around good examples and so on. And then also this provocation back for the PGA, how do we bring this into the governmental processes? Related, I think, in certain ways, how do we bring this into other political spaces and start to build those bridges? So thank you all for those questions. You have an opportunity to deepen them when we move into the table discussions after the coffee break. For now, before we do that, let me move one by one to the panelists for a final set of reflections. Please.
I said water is wet. I know the world is more complicated than that. And that's why all which happens around the UN, in the UN, with the UN, takes so long sometimes to deliver results. But indeed, we try to bring in, and this is a question which was asked by many, the best knowledge available. That's why we have a group of scientists, independent scientists, who have produced this research, which took 4 years and delivered to you as a contribution to the participants, to the member states, to everybody, in fact, because it's a publicly available work, with the knowledge that they put together given their various backgrounds. We have a Science and Technology Innovation Forum, which happens every year and brings in all sorts of scientific communities to the membership. We have a technology mechanism, which is a facility to do the same thing, basically in a different way. So we have a lot of mechanisms at the UN to bring in knowledge and scientific evidence to the membership, and we try to be to fulfill the role of convening here the best knowledge. I give you another example, the data. We all are eager and obviously we need to have valid data which are reliable and credible. We have a very qualified set of statisticians which work on that. The department I have the honor of serving produces not only the official statistics, but a lot more than that, and it works with the national statistical offices of each and every member state and gives not only the result, but also helps to strengthen the capacity building of the national statistical services to expand the knowledge of what is real in their own individual countries. And I can go on for a long time, and let me dispel 1 minute. We love PhDs, we have many of them, and they are welcome, so encourage your students to apply, and with that I wrap it up.
I'm glad you answered that question. That was a tough one. And certainly to be picked up at the tables. The other contributing fact that I would add is less than 1% of ODA that goes to national statistics offices and for statistical functions nationally. So I mean, the reality is that not only all of the other ways we need to do more, but these are significantly underfunded areas, and that's something I think is also a point of collective conversation here that needs to change. Let me move next to Albert.
Okay, I'm going to make a quick few points. We don't have time to go into the details, but the International Science Council, through its Global Commission on Science Missions for Sustainability, has been reflecting on these questions for a considerable period of time. We worked really hard to try and find an alternative way forward to try and fast track the SDGs. This is a report that's published and being launched on Monday morning at 8 o'clock in meeting room 11, Edith, if I'm not mistaken, that provides a mechanism for us for dealing with this intractable problem that we're trying to deal with at the moment. For all of you that are interested in that mechanism, I would like to invite you to join us for that particular session, when we will unpack what the thinking is that emerged from the Commission. But I want to raise just a few points. The first is around the idea of mission-driven science. It's not just about targets. We set targets in 2015, which is great. But it's about more than that. It's about aligning and putting in place the institutions, the instruments, the capabilities, and the resources that are needed to deliver on those targets. So it's not just about landing somebody on the moon, but how do you get there? And so the International Science Council has spent a lot of time in the last few years focusing not just on what the next great science intervention is to try and move us forward, but to focus on how are we going to do it? What are the differences in the way we go about our science to make sure we can engage with communities and truly put in place transdisciplinary mechanisms to deliver sustainability solutions from the bottom up in terms of engaging with communities. So this report will reflect on that. I just want to put on the table that a key component of the thinking behind this report is the complete lack of international funding for delivering the SDGs. We spend about let's pick on friends in this conversation, the Global Forum of Funders that are working together with us here, spend about, Peter indicated, 1% or 2% of their $70 billion global annual budget on collective research enterprises across the world. That's about 1%, or just a little bit more. The global R&D spend is now at the moment about $2.3 trillion per annum, all right? And I think this little investment in some of the most pressing and some of the most important human and planetary problems that we face, of 1% of our global research spend, not just the R&D spend, seriously is not sharing a message of that anybody is serious about actually trying to resolve these matters. I think it's really important when we set a global agenda and expect science and society to deliver on these, that we cannot anticipate that these deliverables will happen through a process of osmosis. And we cannot just put on the table what I call a seaside bucket and spade budget and expect them to resolve our global problems and challenges at the end of the day. These science funding mechanisms need to become serious, they need to become scaled to the kind of problem we're trying to tackle, and they need to be appropriate. Just to give you an example, for some other reason, when nations want to build large telescopes, accelerators, and space stations, they find a way to collectively fund these. CERN now has an annual budget of $1 billion per annum, and there are a number of other examples I can give you. But yet when it comes to our urgent global change and SDG research that's required and its implementation, it appears for some other reason institutionally impossible to co-fund the necessary global collaboration to actually achieve these. These are our most pressing human problems, yet we have no mechanism to fund them. So please folks, we're going to be talking about this on Monday. Come and join us, and we'll try and share with you some of the thinking that's emerged from this really important piece of work to take us a giant leap forward, we hope, in the space of sustainability and SDG funding.
Thank you, Dr. Vivi. I'd like to respond for 2 points in regard to the transformation, how the SDGs help us for the transformations. For us, actually, SDG is a framework to understand the issues in more holistic way. For example, in energy transition, it's not only preparing the transitions, but also need to be just. So in the context of Indonesia, when we are talking about coal firing or early retirement for the coal-based electricity, we also have to bring an opportunity for the coal producer provinces not to or won't reduce their quality of services to the community, as well as providing a better job or greener job for the one who will lost from working from the coal companies. And also SDGs providing a framework of collaborations with the businesses as well. For example, we already issued the SDGs bond, in also the blue bond and the green bond, by putting the participations of the businesses into the financing of the SDGs. The second point I'd like to respond on the oceans. For countries who rely or have oceans in their area, we could see it as a new source of growth. So we, besides thinking about encouraging the traditional sectors, we also think about the emergent sectors from the oceans. So I think this is the role of the science to exploring like bioeconomy, bioprospecting, other things that we are now exploring also, how to calculate the emissions not only from the blue mangrove, but also the sediment from the tidal flood, who could actually have a significant role in reducing the emissions, and many other more that maybe other countries' science already have exploration on this. So working together for oceans in the near future is really helping us to applying the principles of the SDGs. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. And also.
Thank you. I'll try and be brief, but I wanted to pick up on this first question on metrics of success. It's something we thought a lot about when preparing the GSDR. I mean, ultimately you asked about the risk of backtracking on the level of ambition of the goals when we see that we are very far off track. Ultimately, I think that's up to the member states, the politicians, to maintain the level of commitment, level of aspiration. And I hope this, of course, is a strong outcome from the SDG summit this year. From a scientific perspective, something we did in the GSDR also is to look at some medium-term trends, medium or long-term trends, which we call conditions for achieving SDGs, which are also deteriorating. Climate change, biodiversity loss, the number of violent conflicts in the world. So I think we need to be very realistic that the conditions are challenging for achieving SDGs and in some cases worsening. So in that context, we also say in the report that I think we need to adopt a mindset of every inch of progress matters, very similar to what the IPCC has expressed about 1.5-degree target. To put a more positive twist on that, a key message from the report is also transformation is possible and inevitable. So when we were discussing in the group, we felt that science has been putting forward the case and the evidence that we need transformation. It's there. There is ample evidence to support the level of ambition of the SDGs and safeguard that level of ambition. But we do feel now there is a moment for science to step up and even provide more evidence, more synthesized evidence of how transformation is actually possible, looking at historical examples, looking at current examples, and also making the point that transformation is inevitable. We are not going to actually work in a business as usual environment. We're going to have a world change from climate change, basically. So we would really welcome also science to sort of join that key message, transformation is possible and inevitable. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pisanu. With no warning whatsoever, I'm going to ask if the PGA president would like to say any last remarks to the question that was asked of you about science and intergovernmental processes. Over to you.
Thank you much indeed, and many, many thanks for the question of the one. How science can influence decision making in the UN. For those who are less familiar with this beast called United Nations, I have to make a distinction for you. Member states, the General Assembly, is the place for policy making. The Secretariat or the Secretariat plus agencies are the implementation agencies. So let me take first the General Assembly when it comes to the Member States. And with concrete examples. And this year, this session, we had 16 negotiation processes. It's way too much, but 16 negotiating processes that is engaging all the Member States and trying to produce some kind of decisions, results. Where we invited science into those 16 negotiating processes. At the very beginning, for each and every process, to create a scientific evidence base, to make sure that we jointly understand where we are, what is the departure point, what are the major issues to be addressed, and what are the possibilities from the point of view of science. There is another stage of the possible intervention of science into the work of the General Assembly, which is still not working very well. The first one is more or less on track, or more or less. The second is when the negotiations are very close to the fruition phase. In my understanding, there is a need for a reality check on the result. Whether we are really hitting the target, what we wanted, or we did something different. Third one is when the result is there, decision, resolutions are there, and it goes to the implementation. It is now the weakest spot in the United Nations. We have to keep records of the real implementation, based on evidence. That will surely have to be done together, or maybe with the leadership of the CSABA, because we need to have a real-time, evidence-based picture, broken down to countries, regions, sex, level of development, so real-time data of how we are doing with the implementation. In the case of SDGs, our system is not really very informed. Let me also mention a missing point, and let me invite you all, please help us in the United Nations. We were discussing here the metrics of success, how to measure, but let's be quite honest. If we ask ourselves, can we measure transformation today? The honest answer is no. We have some vague ideas because we are measuring certain parts of the transformation, but we certainly don't measure the interlinkages, don't measure the side effects, and therefore we don't measure the final. This metrics, this measurement methodology, measuring sustainability transformation should be created. It doesn't exist today. The Statistical Commission started, the member states are engaging, but we are still far away. In my best understanding, this measurement should have been ready by September 2023, by the SDG Summit, to make it sure that our pledge to the world that we are going to use the remaining 7.5 years will be much more credible than it was in the first 7.5 years. So it is not ready, but I hope it will be ready by September 2024. And last but not least, to the transformation what we mentioned. Let's be quite honest to ourselves. Transformation is happening. We like it or we don't like it. We make it or we don't make it. Because of climate change, because of water crises, because of wars and many others. The big question to us today, whether we would like to be masters of the transformation or victims of the transformation. And the decision is in our hands, yours and ours. Thank you very much.
Let me ask Peter to come in with a few closing thoughts, and Ambassador, please want to.
Thank you. Scientists and technologists are very good at understanding risk, assessing risk. Climate change, COVID, the risk of a viral pandemic, we knew about it long before the world responded to it. The issues are wide, and this is very important. It required and wasn't there continuous independent input of science into the policy system and continuous requests from the policy system as to what they want. And I think we still are away, while a lot of knowledge is now known in the science of evidence to policy, policy to evidence, how they interact, it's not being well applied. And I think that we still, and President KtomRÖSI in particular, has done a lot of work to try and increase that within the policy part of the new UN system. But it cannot be episodic, it needs to be continuous. I was Chief Science Advisor to the Government of New Zealand for 10 years. It wasn't seeing the Prime Minister once every 3 weeks or 6 weeks that makes a difference. It was interacting every day with the senior part of the policy process, informally and continuously to say what science knows, what science doesn't know, and what are the options ahead for the policy community. And remember, the policy community needs to make decisions now. It doesn't have the luxury of waiting till we answer every scientific question. So the ISC is trying to work with the United Nations system, both the policy community and the member state community and the administrative communities, to try and see ways to get far more continuous and iterative two-way feedback into the system. Because it's only with that, and we must be humble, the decisions that the policy makers and the politicians have to make are complex. They're not based on evidence alone. And scientists don't have all the answers. Communities, there are many other dimensions to it. And we'll be trusted more if we're honest about what we know and what we don't know, and provide that in the right way to the policy community.
Thank you very much. And I've been thinking about where the gap is, especially with member states. I think when the negotiations happen, who is in the room, what mandates do they have in the room, is really a space where we need to look at. Because in that room we are having different countries, close to 193 or maybe less, but they're all coming with their interests. Whatever science says, they're looking at that from their perspective. And I always find that there's a space, there's a sweet spot that we need to find where we are able to, as different negotiators looking for the interests of our countries, find a way of agreeing. I also think that sometimes the peers are not probably that much engaged. So there's a gap of how do you engage the peers at their level and the experts in the room and make sure that we are all taking the same language. So if Matu, the peer, is not as engaged as the expert and the negotiations, something happens there that doesn't really give us the answers or the resolutions that we really know have to come out of the process. Thank you.
Thank you so much for our opening speakers, to all of our panelists. We're going to deepen these discussions at the table. A couple of things that come up to me right away is this notion of mission-driven science. And several have talked not only about bridge building and connections, but particularly with local levels, and making that real and connecting that with people's lived experiences. The ambassador, I also want to punctuate the point in the beginning around indigenous knowledge. And I think one of the challenges we do face is certain types of knowledge, or certain types of data, or certain types of science are seen as more credible than others. And I think that's something that we also need to interrogate in this room, and how do we bring a more inclusive perspective to the table in these discussions. 2 points building on the last remarks, particularly from Peter. I think we have some challenges in our hands around question intelligence and question asking. And my sense is that in a world that we are all under extreme pressure to have solutions very, very fast on the table, we forget or we lose the art of interrogating the question. What are we trying to solve for? What do we know? What don't we know? What's in our hands? What's out of our hands? Because I think this becomes really critical, not jumping to solutions before we're spending our time in the questions themselves. And that is a bridge-building exercise between scientific community and policymakers. The second then is parlaying that from question intelligence to decision intelligence. And several have spoken on the panel and also earlier, how does science influence decision making? But for me, you have to rewind that question 3 or 4 steps to say, how are we defining the questions in the first place? Are we comfortable to do it? Are we just under so much pressure to have the answer that we jump over what we don't know and bringing that together with other people that might? So again, I'm really looking forward to the discussions in the smaller groups around the tables after the coffee break. We're asking you to enjoy coffee and something to eat that's here. For those of you that don't know each other as well, what a great opportunity to introduce yourself, or to our speakers, ask those questions. We'll come back at 11, and we'll give you the instructions for the way that we'll work in tables. So thank you all very much. Thank you again for all of our panelists and speakers. See you back at 11.